G'day YouTube, warbles on a lot here at the Land of the Beardies History House and Museum in Glen, where from 1972 to 78 I spent most of my Christmas holidays because my parents had been involved in getting this place going since the late 1960s. And they dragged me around as they were collecting articles with which to put together quite a serious style of a local history museum. Nobody's ever going to get that one going again, are they? And in fact, restoring the bits and bobs and getting them all going again was one of the things that my father used to get into. This boiler used to feed this double action steam engine, and I have seen that running on compressed air from an electric air compressor fed in through that pipe. A wooden fusible drive coupling at the trade fair in 1976 at Glen. In fact, I was a young monkey who was left turning the tap on and off and showing it to people while conserving the compressed air in the tank. So anyway, back when I was maybe 16, 15, late 1970s, the old man got me to go and help him to shift what he called his charcoal gas producer from storage at the Wharton's garage or blacksmithing shop paint shed, and we brought it up here and stored it at the History House, the Land of the Beardies. They used to boil down cows in that. Yeah, sheep and some cattle to get the fat and sell the fat. Which is a bit of a segue, but anyway. Now this charcoal gas producer, of which I'd only vaguely heard as a child, when you have to pick it up and lift it and juggle it around, you ask a few questions even as a teenager. So here we have the device itself. I never ever saw it hooked up and connected, so I don't know. I can't tell you precisely 100% how you connected it and how it worked. But of course the basic idea is that this is filled full of charcoal, and you burn the charcoal in a low oxygen environment, so the carbon in the charcoal can't burn, but the fire is hot enough to drive off the volatiles like methane and hydrogen and carbon monoxide. And the methane and the hydrogen and the carbon monoxide are extracted from this thing. Well, the whole device was mounted on a little shelf built onto the back bumper bar of the vehicle. You can see the bolt holes on the four flanges, and as I understand it, burning in a low oxygen environment, the combustion gases, they come out here and they come up along there and maybe drop a bit of ash, and they go into here and they drop a whole lot more ash, and they come out there and they go onto a pipe which is currently missing, but which would have brought the hot gases up from here to here and brought them over here, thin wall pipe. All that's thin wall pipe to radiate heat. There might have been calcium carbonate, limestone, in that in order to try and absorb the carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide was a bit of a problem, and carbon monoxide is poisonous, but it burns. Anyway, you get your hot gases coming into here, and this one, it has, there we go, a water inlet, or maybe that's an outlet, and it has another water connection and a water connection there and a water connection down there. Now, I don't know, but perhaps this whole thing is a water jacket to keep the fire hot and the rest of it, you know, the outside of it, tolerably cool. Because bear in mind, Dad used to use this in 1944 and 45 when petrol was rationed to take the family 200 kilometres to the coast. You know, it was downhill getting there, uphill coming back. You didn't get a lot of power out of your wood gas, which was hydrogen and methane, mainly methane and a little bit of carbon monoxide. So one of the features that I do remember being told about and hanging on to it was a flat sheet metal horseshoe shaped petrol tank that held, I think it was half a gallon. And you mounted this around the steering column and it had a little petrol stopcock so that as you would drop, well, you started it on petrol. Once you got the motor running and warmed up, then you gradually valved off the petrol and valved on the wood gas. If you were trying to go up a steep hill, you ran it on a little bit of petrol or maybe, you know, half petrol, half wood gas. Just not a lot of calorific value in your charcoal gas. But when you could only get 4 gallons a month, 5 gallons a month, you weren't going to go, what's that, 20 litres? You weren't going to go 200 kilometres to the coast in the sort of cars they had during World War II. Okay, so to drive on the road registered in a renewably powered vehicle in 1944, which is 80 years ago, you had to have one of these on the back of your car. Now, this would be very, very hot. This wouldn't be quite so bad because it's water cooled, as evidenced by the connections there. And I'm getting the idea that this one over here, it's got your water connections on it, coming up to a water tank, right? It's only water cooling the fireplace. So you've got a water cooled fireplace and it draws its gas out here and percolates the cinders and charcoal and God knows what that's come through, and that's its feed off to the vehicle. This one that Dad built, it's more elegant, more sophisticated, got more features, better gas scrubbing. This is what delivers your propulsive gas to the motor vehicle, and bear in mind this is all on the back of your car. You've now got to get this up to the front of the car, so there's a thin wall sheet metal pipe running under the floorboard, and your thin metal pipe is full of hot, explosive, colourless, odourless, poisonous gas. Shit, that's fun, isn't it? Not like there's anything could go wrong with it, you know, like a stone pokes a hole in your gas delivery pipe and everybody falls asleep from the carbon monoxide and you run off the road and you crash, and then you've got a fire, an explosive gas in the Australian forest in summer when you go onto the coast to have a holiday. So there's not like it was simple or easy. It was pretty complicated. And you'll notice the welding on this is really good quality stuff. This would be because my grandfather had the first oxy welding set from Brisbane to Newcastle, and he was the gun welder in the district when my father was getting set up to become the gun engine reconditioner in the district. So, of course, you had to have the charcoal. So where did they go to get the charcoal? We will answer that later on. And if you wanted to come home from the coast, it meant you had to either have a supply of charcoal organised at the coast, or you had to carry bags, like chaff bags full of charcoal, and you need the best quality charcoal. And so that is how you get renewably powered road transport in Glen 40 years ago, and it's in the museum. I'm sure you've gathered the purpose of this video. This is how I do renewably powered road transport in 2024. It will not take the family to the coast for a holiday, but every time I come to town to get 2 loaves of bread and a litre of milk, this thing saves 3 litres, which is not going into the Subaru. Since I got solar panels to run this thing on, I've done 700 and something kilometres. 730, shall we say? That's about 70 litres that I have not burnt in the Subaru at nearly $2 a litre. So $140 of petrol I have not had to purchase because I've already spent that money on standalone off-grid solar system which recharges the bike. And that's what I sort of kind of want to talk about in today's video. How much hard work and personal misery and personal skill and expertise you needed to be able to drive a renewably powered road vehicle here 80 years ago. Like, you know, my grandfather helped my father to do it, and it worked, and he liked it so much he kept it. And according to the sign, yes, they were mounted on vehicles during World War II, and during the Suez Crisis they were also doing it, because, you know, the people who are running the museum can remember the Suez Crisis, but they were a bit young to be remembering World War II. They know it happened in World War II, but yeah, I never heard of my parents, or my father, pulling this out in 1956. He probably had a means of getting enough petrol for his needs at that time. Anyway, okay, well, it's getting a bit hot here in the sun. Why don't we, I don't know, go up to the lookout and maybe sit under a tree and crunch just a few numbers and see what we can see. Got that camera running, and hopefully focused in a good direction. Now, I had an 18-kilometre trip to get here, and I'm sitting on 80% of a battery. And it's a 2.3 kilowatt hour battery. This thing only does, by law, 45 kilometres an hour, but that's kind of like the average speed between having a full battery and a flat battery, and yeah, you'll get 45 kilometres an hour average speed. We're doing 49 at the moment coming down this hill, 48 along the flat. So it's not a motorcycle, it's a motor scooter. It's an electric motor scooter, a truck chaser. But you can connect it up to a solar panel and go to town on it. And that, to me, is a pretty good thing. You might have noticed I didn't use any conventional braking when I rolled the throttle off. It got into its regenerative braking phase. And the funny thing is, 50 kilometres an hour is your maximum speed around town in the built-up area. And it's half highway speed. And as speed doubles, drag squares. And that's kind of worth bearing in mind. What the hell? I have no idea why it stopped and dropped on me there. Maybe I do. There's a sensor on the kickstand which tells the computer when the kickstand is still down, and that sensor's had its wires accidentally sheared off by a workshop stand, and perhaps there was a short circuit and the computer decided the kickstand was down, and therefore it shut the motor off and I had to reboot the system. But anyway, all the fun of adopting fairly new technology at a more or less early stage, I guess. But what I was getting at is that if you're prepared to run your electric vehicle at 50 kilometres an hour, you're going to have a whole lot less power requirement to overcome the aerodynamic drag. And bearing in mind that if you leave home in the morning and come home at night time, every hill you go up, you're going to drive back down. And when you're rolling downhill, you don't use a lot of power, although you use more power going up a hill than you save by rolling back down. It's really how much power you use to maintain cruising speed that matters. And now we're going up a pretty fair hill, we're doing 45 kilometres an hour. We might be using fairly close to the 3,000 watt maximum continuous. What are we? Yeah, we're using 81 kilowatt hours per kilometre to come up this hill at this speed. Whereas I normally only use 45 or 50 watt hours per kilometre to be doing 49 kilometres an hour on a flat road. So I might have been using 2,000 watts to go up that hill at that speed. My considered opinion is this thing uses about 1 kilowatt to do its 45 to 50 kilometres an hour. It's being regulated by the computer much more than by the battery voltage. Now, your ordinary average everyday normal car, if you're going to push it on flat concrete with its tyres properly pumped up, you will be able to push it at about 5 kilometres an hour, which is 3 miles an hour. And a human produces a third of a horsepower, which is 250 watts. If you want to drive your car at 50 kilometres an hour in town, you're going to use about 5 horsepower to push the air out of the way. That's about 3.6 kilowatts. If you want to run your car at 100 kilometres an hour, you remember when I said that as speed doubles, drag squares? Well, your 5 horsepower, or 3.6 kilowatts, at 50 kilometres an hour, or 31 miles an hour in town, at 100 kilometres an hour on the open road, that becomes about 14 kilowatts. You're looking at 5 horsepower of drag becoming 25 horsepower of drag. And I'm interested in knowing how much money you have to spend on standalone renewable solar gear in order to run your electric rechargeable vehicle on renewable energy. And I know that this bike cost me $7,000 in the shop, and I know that I paid $10,049 for the solar system, and that was after it was installed and after I paid the goods and services tax. So on the one hand, you could say, well, just take the purchase price of your electric vehicle, multiply that by 1.46, right? Because that's what $10,049 is as a factor of 7,000. And that'll give you a fair idea of the amount of money you got to spend on standalone solar gear to be able to recharge your 4-seat passenger electric plug-in vehicle. Now, a Tesla is about $92,000, and a bloke I know who has one and lives 50 kilometres out of town, so he likes to be able to drive 100 kilometres on his Tesla and then recharge it when he gets home after work. I asked him how much money he spent on his solar gear to recharge his $92,000 Tesla, And he said he spent $48,000 to upgrade his Tesla, his power system, to cope with the Tesla. And I thought, well, fair enough. And I didn't think too much more about it until after I paid the bill for the solar system for this. And according to the figures I just explained to you, 1.46 times 92, he really should be spending about $138,000 on solar gear to recharge the Tesla. So I figure he must have already had about $100,000 of standalone solar gear, as in panels, charge controller, batteries and inverter, in order to be able to do that job. And let's face it, he's not trying to recharge his Tesla after he's driven it for 300 kilometres either. He's only trying to recharge it after a 100 kilometre run to town and maybe 5k's around town before going home again. The run into town will use a lot of power because he's got to come up about 1,500 metres to get here. No, 700 or 800 metres. Anyway, that's one way of roughly rule of thumb looking at it. Another way is to say that this machine has a 3 kilowatt rated motor, 3,000 watts, $10,049 for a 3 kilowatt maximum continuous rated motor. That's $3,335 per kilowatt of motor installed. And that would mean that however big the motor is in your Tesla, multiply the size of the motor by $3,335 to figure out how much money you got to spend on your solar gear. And a different way of triangulating the figure is that this has got a 2.3 kilowatt hour battery, and that's $4,326 of solar gear per kilowatt hour of battery to be recharged. Now what I'm sitting on here, this is the street legal version of a motocross electric motor scooter. The Talaria Sting MX has the same physical motor and gearbox and chain and back wheel and cog sizes, all that, but it's got a 6,000 watt motor with no software regulation. It'll do 75 kilometres an hour, whereas this will only do 45. But this will run for an hour and 3/4 at full power, and you can go 70 kilometres on a full battery. So, judging by how much power it takes to charge the bike's battery, as measured by how much power the gel cells have to put into the inverter to run the bike's battery charger, and how much the solar panels have to put into the charge controller to charge the gel cells afterwards, this has got a 3,000 watt motor and it cruises on 1/3 throttle. I actually use about 1 kilowatt to do 50 kilometres an hour going up the road. Lightweight, low speed, low aerodynamic drag. If I wanted to drive at twice the speed, I would have to use 5 times as much power, which is a bit sad. But it means that if you were to build a 4-seat passenger vehicle using motorcycle components and build it really, really lightweight and restrict its speed to 50 kilometres an hour, you could probably build an electric passenger vehicle that would be, I don't know, 1/3 of the weight, travel at half the speed, be a hell of a lot cheaper to buy, and you'd probably be able to afford the solar panels to recharge it. But as it stands, using those parameters, because it takes about quoting John Cardigan, an automotive engineer and journalist who runs a YouTube channel talking about cars, his pet hate is electric vehicles. He quotes 630 grams of carbon emitted to the atmosphere per megawatt hour produced on the state grid, and he reckons that an electric car gets 6 kilometres per kilowatt hour, and he asserts that a Tesla running on grid power has the same carbon emissions footprint as a four-wheel drive sports utility vehicle running on diesel, which weighs as much as a Tesla. And I can't fault him in that. He also states that such a vehicle is going to get 6 kilometres per kilowatt hour. So you're looking at 16 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres at 100 kilometres an hour in your Tesla. And they talk about a 300 kilometre range. So to have a 300 kilometre range at 6 litres per 100, no, say that again, 6 kilometres per kilowatt. You're basically going to need 45 or 50. Say 45 to 50 kilowatt motor so that you can run it at 1/3 throttle at cruising power. And then you're going to want to run it for 3 hours at about 16 kilowatt hours or kilowatts rating. So you're going to need, say, a 40 kilowatt hour battery and a 50 kilowatt hour motor, and that would stick close to the ratio where this thing's got a 3,000 watt motor and a 2.3 kilowatt hour battery. See, the motorcycle doesn't have a huge range. It's as long as you're going to want to sit on the motorbike, I guess. At the end of a 1 hour ride, you're pretty glad to get off, in my experience. At the end of an hour and 23 minutes, you're very bloody glad to get off. But if you calculate the size of the solar array with the batteries and all the electronics to feed a Tesla with a 50 kilowatt motor at $3,335 per kilowatt of motor capacity, you're looking at $167,000 worth of solar panels and batteries and charge controller and inverter. If, however, you look at a 40 kilowatt hour battery to be charged at $4,326, then you're up around $218,000, $220,000 for your standalone solar gear to charge your $92,000 Tesla with a 50 kilowatt motor and a 40 kilowatt hour battery. Okay, so unless you got pretty close to $320,000, $350,000, you're not going to get a 4-seat 100 kilometre an hour cruise electric car running on solar panels the way my motorbike runs on solar panels. If you want to cut the price down by a factor of 5, simply build it a whole lot lighter and cut your speed in half. And if you start thinking that it's a whole lot of work and, oh, I don't want to fuck around with all of the difficulties of paying attention to the batteries and worrying about the charge state, having the range anxiety, you want to think about range anxiety, you think about my father with his roof rack covered in sugar bags or chaff bags full of charcoal, a roaring fire in a water-cooled fireplace sitting on his back bumper bar, and colourless, odourless, poisonous, explosive gas in a thin-walled sheet metal pipe underneath the floorboards of his car. Also, he could take the family to the coast for a holiday at Christmas time. I mean, he liked being a trendsetter and having better stuff than anybody else had, and I suppose he probably raised me to feel the same way. But I really wish he had restored that bloody charcoal gas producer and got it going. I would have loved to have seen that, but he said it was put away dirty, so it was never cleaned out after the last time it was used. Inside it, it's got all of the bloody toxic poisonous tar and shit that comes out of the charcoal. I know I had a bit of a go at making synthetic gas out of wood with solar power to run my kitchen stove, and it turned out you'd need 5 square metres of parabolic elliptical reflector. You'd need, I think, about a 10-litre steel hydrolysis reaction vessel with about 5 kilograms of wood pieces in it, and you'd have to have an absolutely clear blue sky with no smoke haze and no cloud and no wind, and then you'd have to track it perfectly, and you'd probably run a 3 or a 4 hour production run, and then you'd have to put your gas into a water gasometer involving a 10,000 litre water tank upside down inside a 15,000 litre water tank, and bubbling your gas into the water underneath the upside down tank with bricks on the lid of the tank to keep the pressure up to run your gas stove. And again, you're dealing with a mixture of carbon monoxide, methane and hydrogen. So with some carbon dioxide in there, although you try and scrub it out. So colourless, odourless, poisonous, explosive gas, do I want that in my kitchen stove? At the moment I'm using colourless, odourless, liquid natural gas, but they put a stink bomb in the gas, so if I've got a gas leak in my kitchen stove I can smell it. If I try to use charcoal gas or wood gas, you can't smell that stuff. So my personal impression is that for going to town for groceries, this is really, really good. For going to Armidale to visit the doctor or get a CAT scan done, no bloody good at all. If you had something like a pre-World War I, quote, bicycle car made out of bicycle bits and pieces, very lightweight, maybe a 5 or a 10 kilowatt motor, yeah, you probably could carry 2 people in comfort at this speed with a few groceries, maybe 2 grown-ups and a couple of kids. But I just don't see, even if the current economic society and system was to continue indefinitely, which it almost certainly will not, I don't see your average working class family being able to afford renewable electric vehicles to do the amount of driving that people do these days. I mean, it's a long time since I saw somebody walk out of his house, get into his car, drive across the road, get out of his house, go into a convenience store and buy a loaf of bread, get out of the shop, get into his car, drive back across the road, park in his driveway and get out of the car. I have seen that done, but it was in 1972. And back then people really did not give a shit. Hopefully the camera's still running, hopefully it's focused on something that's worth looking at. And yeah, this is what practical, affordable, renewable electric road transport is like, unless you've got $250,000 to throw at the project. If you can afford to buy a really small, compact, petrol-powered road vehicle, you can afford an electric motor scooter and the solar panels to run it on. And quite honestly, I don't mind riding the bike at half the speed the cars go at. And as you can see, this is a Saturday morning. There's not actually a hell of a lot of traffic on the road. As global warming bites, as agriculture fails, as the cost of food and groceries rises, there's less and less discretionary spending available to buy fossil fuel and just drive around at high speed for the fun of it. Not so many people are going out for a Sunday afternoon drive or a Saturday drive. And I suspect that as the economy becomes ever less profitable, people are going to start willingly choosing to drive slower in order to save fuel. And as I've explained, I reckon the people who put this motorbike together, A, they were very clever, B, they were very skilled, and C, they thought about it very carefully, and they've hit a fairly practical sweet spot. .3 kilowatt hours of battery is a bloody sight cheaper than 40 kilowatt hours of battery. A new battery for this thing costs $2,500. So it's about $1,000 per kilowatt hour of battery storage. Pretty sure a new battery for your Tesla is about $40,000. So yeah, I think it's a 40 kilowatt hour battery. To run their motor at 1/3 throttle at cruising speed on a flat road up the highway, yeah, they're going to need a 50 kilowatt motor, or 45 at least. Fella behind me is just going to have to bloody suck it up and slow down. Hopefully there's not too much cloud in the sky to wash out the charge couple device. It generally doesn't like having clouds in the sky. If you've got a blue sky day, you get absolute perfect colour balance from the foreground. Bright white reflectiveness up in the sky, it burns out the colour. And as I was going to say, or as I mentioned earlier on, because I was going to talk about it later, now it is later. The charcoal, for the charcoal gas producer, came from the Wharton's Garage blacksmith forge. And about 9 years ago, I had a visit from my cousin Globetrotter. She'd never been here before. I gave her telephone directions and she showed up with her husband at night. Not so many people can find my place at night. A lot of people can't find it in the day. A couple of months later I had a visit from my brother. He's 20 years older than me. I mentioned that cousin Globetrotter had found my place no trouble. And my brother said, oh yeah, well I never have any trouble finding this place either. Used to come up here as a kid. And I said to him, what, right here? And he said, yeah, this ridge where you live. I said, what were you doing coming up here as a kid? And he said, Mandy, which is what we used to call my grandfather. Our elder sister couldn't say grandpa, so she christened him Mandy. He said, Mandy used to bring me out here to collect charcoal for the forge. So, turns out I've bought the title deed to my grandfather's charcoal mine, so to speak. He would have been collecting charcoal from bushfires which had not quite fully combusted big old gum trees, because this place was pretty much cleared with fire after being ring-barked, after being selectively logged. So I just think it's a nice little circularisation of the narrative to have started off as a charcoal gas producer made by my father and my grandfather, and then ride home on an electric motorbike back to the exact place where they used to get the charcoal to put through the blacksmith forge and the charcoal gas producer. And you might have noticed on the back of the bike I've trained it to carry the walking stick. So that walking stick's got a handle that was on the grandfather's walking stick, and the shaft was some Malacca cane my father brought back from the Barrier Reef when he went on a holiday in 1926, 27. So I've taken the ancestral walking stick on the renewable charged or renewably fueled electric road vehicle off to have a look at the 80-year-old charcoal gas producer. And then we're right now going back to where the charcoal used to come from. As I said, it's a nicely circular little narrative. I hope I haven't made a mess of the narration. I hope I haven't, onto the rough play now, hope I haven't made a mess of the pause button or the framing or the lighting, and ideally the battery hasn't gone flat during the making of the movie, because I did have to start it 3 times, and the first full start was 8 minutes long. Now this is the closest this thing's got to a gearbox. I go into economy mode and now I'll only do 35 instead of 45. And I think you've only got about 1.5 kilowatts available. So you're a lot less likely to get going too fast going up the hill. Because if you get going too fast, it's not difficult to get spat off. And so far, I have not yet been spat off. It stopped and propped on me once when I tried to go up a gutter that was a bit too steep and it acted like chalk. And another time, I was trying to pull into my parking spot in my backyard without putting my feet down, and I fell over on the bike, but I didn't fall off the bike. And yesterday, in the main street, I managed to try and take off while I had the steering lock on. And you fall over within 2 metres when you do that. And you feel very bloody silly. 2,769 kilometres. That little trip was 30 minutes for 19 kilometres. Average speed of 39, maximum speed of 55, and we're home on 51% of a battery. And that last kilometre used 51 watt hours per kilometre. I don't know. I think it's bloody good value for an electric motorbike with a solar gear to charge it, but you'd want to be a really rich person to have a solar powered Tesla, in my estimation. Okay. Yes, this little bit of a manoeuvre here is where I made a mess of it. When the bike was only about, there we go, it was only in the last metre that I put my foot down. Well, when I was making the last turn, last 90-degree right angle turn, that was where I fell off a couple of thousand kilometres ago. Well, no, I didn't fall off, fell over. And yesterday in the main street, didn't fall off, fell over. So, there we go. My father's walking stick shaft and my grandfather's walking stick handle. And I've just taken the walking stick to town to have a look at the ancestral charcoal gas producer. Now this motor's casing is about 45 degrees, I think. I'm using it. 44. So I wasn't too far off it. 44 degrees now. The air temperature now is 32. And one of the less endearing things about electric vehicles is they don't like getting hot. And whereas your electric cars have got powered fans and heat exchangers to keep their batteries and their motors cool, this relies on airflow. So you're not supposed to ride it when the air temperature is above 40 degrees, because at about 60-65 degrees, your neodymium boron high efficiency magnets in the motor, they turn back into lumps of dirt. They stop being magnets. So you're not allowed to get it too hot. And that means that on the very hottest of days, my 880 watts worth of solar panels aren't going to be able to do much because the batteries are already going to be full, and I won't be able to ride the bike unless it's night time. But 1600 watts worth of 240 volt power, and I can use 2 or 3 kilowatt hours of it, and I've got enough insulation for this shed, and that shed is insulated. We got heat waves predicted, bad weather, global warming, all the rest of it. I have until now been using an evaporative cooler with a 60 watt motor and a duct from its inlet to the outside of a lawn locker so that it can suck cold or cool shady air from here into the humidifier and blow slightly cooler air into the hermit in the hobble hiding from the heat wave. Well, you can't ride the bike when it's over 40. The evaporative cooler is not real good over 40. So when we've got storage for 10 kilowatt hours, which can be 3 of which can be used overnight, and when the batteries are full the 880 watt panels can feed the inverter without troubling the batteries as anything more than a connection point. So I shouted myself a 240 volt, 660 watt air conditioner. I almost wish I had money to buy two of them, one for each shed. And that way, when it's too hot to ride the motorcycle, I can hide in that shed and play YouTube, or I can hide in that shed and play with the tools and the toys. Because global warming is not going to go away, and it's going to get worse for 25 years after the 8.2 billion of us stop burning fossil fuels. And the rest of them don't seem to be interested in not burning fossil fuels because it's so terribly convenient. Anyway, there you go, and there you know. That's my take, as best as I can, on what it costs to do renewable powered road transport. You're going to have to slow it down to half the speed, build it as if it was a bicycle or a bicycle car, and then you can afford it at this stage of the game. How long the economy will last so that people can afford to do that, I have no idea. But that's the best I can come up with. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Yes, I've been thinking about making this video for quite a while. Ciao.